First and foremost, I have Miriam Wanjiru Mwangi, who's from the Laikipia County Assembly, and she's a HR practitioner and a registered professional trainer. Thank you for joining us. She's also part of the Council of the Institute of Human Resource Management. Thank you for joining us. And the other guest I have, who is not very new to our studio, you should actually have some SQ here, is Tony Watima, who's an economist and columnist. Thank you for joining us. And maybe just to begin, I'll begin with, let's go ladies first, with you, Miriam.
Yeah.
What is your feel, what's your expectation of this Labor Day when you just begin the overview of the whole conversation?
My expectation of this Labor Day is that it will bring more harmony between the expectation of workers and that of employers. What we are reading today about Kenya Association of Manufacturers saying that the minimum wages should not be risen, and asking the government maybe to source for money from taxing and things like that. Whereas the workers are still, way below the living wages. So I expect that the government will try to bridge the gap between the expectation of workers and that of employers.
Right. Tony, what about you? What's your expectation today? And do you think some of the promises that are usually made are practical?
My expectations, I'm not sure if I have one. But what we expect most likely is that there will be an increase in minimum wage. And I wish to agree with the Kenya Association of Manufacturers that the current level of our stage of development, we are not on a sustainable trajectory if we continue increasing minimum wage. So basically minimum wage, a state-sponsored minimum wage like the one we have, is a textbook thing that doesn't work. Yeah.
Why do you say it doesn't work? Is it that you feel that there's not enough structures to ensure that this is actually implemented?
Not really, because economic laws are not things that you legislate. If Kenya Association of Manufacturers can afford a specific amount to pay somebody, a law doesn't make him affordable that he can offer. Let me give an example that World Bank statistics says that 40% of Kenyans live below the minimum wage. Not minimum wage, poverty line. That's less than $1 a day. If you calculate that as salary, that is around 30,000 per month, 3,000 a month. So 3,000 a month, when you look at the minimum wage that was set in 2017, it's 6,000, double of that. So you have people at the labor side or ready to offer at least to live above the minimum, above the poverty line of 3,000 a month. But the government legislation says you have to pay those people 6,000. So you get that it becomes unaffordable, because for the 6,000, Kenya Association of Manufacturers can employ 2 people at the same time. So you see the logic is that it's not sustainable the way they're moving. The other thing is even the history of minimum wage. The history of minimum wage was disemploy women and children from employment, from the labor workforce. So you put a price which is, you overprice them. Basically, that's what minimum wage is. You overprice them in the labor market. So you disemploy them from the market. So it's a textbook thing, it's a political thing, basically, that people use, especially unions and all that. So it depends on the perspective that you look at. For us economists, we look at the holistic picture of it. So the minimum wage is not a sustainable thing.
Okay, and coming to you, Miriam, especially as a HR practitioner, you're the people who determine that I'm actually going to, get my money and the likes.
Oh, yes.
When such pronouncements are made, there's the argument that these things are never implemented from the HR end, where I come to work and I am meant to be earning X amount of money based on what the president has given as a directive. But we're not sure whether that actually happens. What happens really?
HR is an office that somehow stands to push the business forward, but also to take care of the workers' interests. So when you're expected to implement this, you have to go back to the bottom line of the employer and look at his abilities. As my friend Tony has said, sometimes some employers are not able to afford, but that's the micro enterprises and things like that. So the HR in those organizations will have to look at the business. We don't just go to worker welfare and things like that. We moved from worker welfare to the management boardroom. So we are also alive to the fact that some of the businesses are not able to afford this. And if the environment allows you to get away with it. Some employers will not go to the minimum wage. In the HR, again, it's a bit painful because, you know, as he's saying, you can pay someone 3,000. Really, no one can afford to live on 3,000 shillings. So you look at the minimum wage and what the employer can afford, and you take like a board paper or a discussion like that, you encourage the employer to pay as much as they can. That's the ability to pay is what is important. But at least you have some figures to guide. You have the living wage, you have the minimum wage to advise your employer. If your employer is not paying minimum wage, of course they are in contravention of government directives, and they are at risk of, you know, crossing the law, and that can be quite expensive. And one of the functions of HR is to protect the employer from running against the law, because it can be quite expensive. So we always advise them to pay the minimum wage. If you're a professional human resource practitioner, which is what the IHRM is encouraging, you will not allow your employer to pay below the minimum wage, even if you're aware they may not afford. So what we encourage is the interaction between the employers and the government, but they have to be at the minimum wage.
So what happens? What's the balance at that point? Because if you're telling your employer you should not pay below minimum wage, yet the employer feels the company cannot afford it at this point in time. Yeah. So does that mean that we now have to resort to retrenchments?
No, that's
so that
where
you
now
can pay, you pay those who are there what they should get.
That's where now the quality of human resource management kicks in. Because if you are a professional and you are an expert, you will have a lot of options on the table for the employer. You can shorten the working time, you know, remove overtime and things like that. You can let the natural attrition just shorten the number of workers, because again now retrenchment again becomes more expensive. So you can fail to replace workers who are leaving naturally and have people get jobs expanded, work less hours a day, so that maybe you have 2 shifts, and you know now you'll have 2 people doing work that was being done by 2 people, 1 person, and things like that. Remove overtime, because they always lead to inefficiencies and things like that. So there are always a lot of options on the table that the HR can offer to their employer, just to make sure they are within the law, and that you know, things like retrenchments are the last option, so to say. Yes.
All right, because then again that becomes a question of the sustainability again of the business, because we've been seeing thousands of people have lost their jobs in the past number of years because of, one, technological disruption. You know, you see it, for example, like in the banks and different other sectors which are very labor intensive. Then you find that now they're going to become more mechanized. And aside from that, we also see, because of the economic state of the country, where people are feeling, or companies feel that they're not able to afford a certain amount of a wage bill. Even the government itself is struggling with the wage bill, you know, and the government is the biggest spender, you know. And Tony, this, as the economist, maybe you can just give, for the sake of those who may not understand, what is the difference between minimum wage? You hear all these wages, minimum wage and living wage. What exactly is this, so that we can know, it gives some context to the conversation as we go forward? Okay.
Minimum wage basically is that this is the least that somebody can pay within their economy. So mostly it's government, that it's a state sponsor, that government decides this is the minimum that you can pay anyone in Kenya, because that's what they feel that they can sustain themselves with. So how they come about with that minimum wage is another topic for another day. But now living wage is that living wage factors in the cost of living. So how much can you live with that? So you above average or you average. It's something that you can meet your daily expenses with that. So if you look at Kenya's average living wage, that the statistics have shown, is around 17,000. You look at the minimum wage is around 6,000, that is moving to 7,000. So probably we'll be looking at maybe 8,000 if this year, if it's increased. But if I respond to something that Miriam said,
yes,
I'm in much in agreement with what she said, and that's the point from the HR perspective. Yeah, and the main point should be that somebody should pay what the company can afford, or the ability to pay. If you look at as I quoted 3,000, it may look small, but 40% of people in Kenya who are able to work don't have that opportunity to even earn that 3,000. So 40% of Kenyans live below the poverty line. They can't earn 3,000. So when you set at 6,000, the whole picture is you've overpriced them in the market. Now, what we do, as Miriam explained, that how the HR works, that there are people who have to do double jobs and all that. The effect of minimum wage, which is the unintended consequences, is that it blocks many people from coming into the labor market. Because if you look at Kenya's labor market, it's a pyramid, more of a pyramid. So the bottom line is the unskilled people. The unskilled people are willing to pay any amount to meet their daily expenses because they don't have anything to do. So when you put at 6,000, you have like 48% of Kenyans have no skills. The highest level of education is primary level. So when you put at 6,000, those people have no opportunity to join the labor market. And now when you look at as economists look at it from a bigger perspective, it gives a serious problem on how you develop an economy. You look at how Asian tigers that we compare ourselves with, how they grew. They didn't have the basic thing about minimum wage. They had more people coming from the base, the people unskilled. So you try to scale them up as you skill them moving up. What we have done is we are trying to put a cap for people not to enter, because when you put a minimum wage, it's like an entry. We are putting a cap of people entering the labor market. So it creates a problem that when you're moving forward as a sustainable economy, we'll have serious problems. Especially, our biggest population is children who are still coming. That's the biggest problem.
But it could be a good problem because we'll have at least a workforce as long as there's something created on that. Yes.
I'll say something about that. Yes. And it's good that Tony is bringing this holistic picture about the economy. Singapore's leader, one of the things he did is put attractive salaries in the civil service to attract the best into the workforce. So reducing salaries does not move a country forward. You have to look at the bigger picture when you are talking about salary, because you want, this is capitalism. It is survival for the fittest. If an employer can only afford to pay 2,000 shillings per person per month, I think they need to rethink their strategy, their business strategy. Probably they can do something else and let those one. It is upon the government to create the right environment to attract the best, and that's how Singapore went. And I think that's one of the economies which we really want to emulate, because at some point they were poorer than us. Now I think they are among the richest in the world. So it is upon the government to create the right environment for the businesses to be able to pay their workers well. If you look at the difference between the living wage and the minimum wage, you can tell we have a long way to go. Tony has quoted 17,000. I have other data that are showing the living wage is 24,000. And the living wage looks at how you are able to survive, the rate of rent, the quality of food, you know, the calories you can afford, and how you are able to take care of your children generally. So it's about the quality of life. It's the basic human development indicators that the salary should be able to take care of. So when you pay someone 3,000 shillings, the country goes down in terms of the quality of life. Even in the way it is viewed in the world, it is not possible. So if we look at only the wages, to be able to bring in more investors, we also need to be able to attract investors who are able to pay better. And also the government on its side, in terms of civil service, pays well so that it attracts the best. And that increases efficiency, so that if we have an economist like Tony working for the government, you can tell we will be hitting the ground running and things will be working. So let's pay people well. If you can't afford to pay people well, probably you need to review your business strategy.
But you know, you've mentioned about the government, you know, paying attractive salaries and the likes. And, you know, there's sad things that we have such a deep culture of corruption, especially in the public service, which is to the own admission of the president himself. You know, no one less. That corruption is causing such a leakage to our economy. Does it seems like even those who are well paid will still want to, you know, get their own extra money from frivolous ways and, you know, and about turn kind of ways. Will this really be a solution for us in Kenya, Tony? If we were to pay the, you know, public servants very handsomely.
No. Even if you pay people 10 million, people still steal because they have opportunity. You know, the affinity to money. The problem is that we have a moral decadence, that people feel that you can steal money and get away with it. That's the biggest problem that we have in Kenya because of checks and balances. So we have people that, you see people stealing every day, and no one is held to account. So people see that you can get away with it. It's an opportunity that you can get away with it. But if we have strict laws, where you find that where there are strict laws and implemented about corruption and transparency, that's where you find that the corruption tolerance goes down. So paying somebody very well is not addressing corruption. Corruption is a moral issue than the income part of it. Because when you find the most corrupt people are the people who have the most money, not the people who have the least money. Yeah.
So you still feel it's a challenge. Yeah. And we find again, like coming back to the HR aspect, and for you who is in HR in a government setting, because in the county assembly of Laikipia, how then do you make sure that you're having credible employees as you're hiring? Because, or is it a case of let's just take this person, we hope they won't steal as much?
No, as Tony has said, it's an issue of, it's the fabric of the society. And we have a very good constitution that has opened room for public participation. The whole constitution is anchored on the ability of the public to participate in decision making. And that is good, but it has also brought a lot of issues when people are involved and they don't have a lot of information. For example, during election time, when campaigns are going on, and all that members of public are asking for is cash. And even after that, when they are employed, when you go to the home of a politician, then I respect Kenyan politicians because they try.
Not everyone thinks that, but carry on.
I agree.
You can carry on.
I have worked with them and I can see. In the morning, we are at their gate waiting for cash. My cow is sick. My child has been, chased out of school. We need school fees. I'm not feeling well. Some even will ask them to restock their businesses. So they are facing a lot of demand for cash. And not just public, state officers, even as public officers. So long as you're in government, there is some expectation that you give back to the society, which is good. Only if this public participation, people are enlightened in the way we need to serve the society. It is not by giving them cash. It is by doing our work. If a member of county assembly is doing their legislative work properly and oversight work properly, that the public should be able to reward them for that. But who does the public reward? It is the one who comes with loads of cash. It is the one who is driving the biggest car. Last year we had a case of, I think it's the former Nyeri women representative giving 5,000 at a harambe in church and saying, this is all I have. And we were discussing that and saying, I think if I were a politician, I would put my salary payslip on the wall and show how I have distributed. I've given Nyawera 20,000, I've given this church 5,000, until that money is, then they tell me, how am I supposed to survive? So even corruption, as we look at the government and the way probably government officials are corrupt, let's also focus on the private sector and individuals. How are they driving this push for corruption? Because it's just the need for money. And EACC will tell you, corruption will thrive where there is opportunity, as Tony put it, where the returns are likely to be very high, and where the likelihood of being caught, so to say, are low. Or even when you are caught, there is a way out. Recently, there was that police officer who was caught taking bribes, and then we realized, kumbe alikuwa ameshikwa hata last year. So we are this cycle where even if you're brought to book, you still get away with it. So if there is opportunity and the returns are high and there is a way of getting away with it, it will still continue thriving. So what we need to do is empower our inspectorate. Even these labor practices we are saying, people are paying below minimum wage, people are putting people in poor working conditions. It is inspectorate and enforcement. In Singapore, what they did, they really empowered their anti-corruption crackdown offices. But here in Kenya, even what we are pushing now is for like the DPP office to do it alone. And it was a good idea to have the EACC and the DPP working together. But then that disconnect still, the EACC feels they need prosecutorial powers. But when they come to do it again, when corruption kicks in, you'll find that
Okay.
they won't do it.
And something that's really interesting, we've heard Atwoli saying that they're expecting Uhuru Kenyatta to be the function, and they expect him to announce an 18% minimum wage increment again, just like last year. Last year, the workers, or at least Kotu, was expecting at least 22%. He got 4% short. So we wait to see whether he'll get the 18% he wants, or anything, if at all. And he also said that he argued, HR, you guys are not implementing. You're not implementing the 18% that has already been pronounced is not being implemented. And he says between August and November, that's within the electioneering period, he says 100,000 jobs were lost. And he argues that all this is based on statistics and research that they have done, you know, in Kotu's economic and statistics arm and research arm. Now, Tony, you had said that you expect an increment. Do you think it will actually be given, especially in light of this is not an election year? Last year it said that, you know, the increment was given because of the elections. But why do you feel that this is still going to be awarded, at least an increase? And do you have any idea of what you think should be a practical figure?
Okay, I'm not sure about the practical figure, but my analysis is there is a rising cost of living. And the way that politicians work and the unionists work is that you raise minimum wage instead of addressing the cost of living itself. If you look at the price of electricity, price of food commodities, they're still high. So those are the things that inform mostly that we will want, that people, most likely that government will try to increase minimum wage. That's my analysis. About the figure, maybe they will give them 10% or 18%, I'm not sure. But most likely they will get an increase.
Today is the day of the worker, not of the politician. So we shall stick to matters of the worker. And coming back into our conversation here in studio, now we can speak a lot about the worker who is at the, you know, at the low level, so to speak. But we also have the people who are, say, you can call them what we popularly refer to as the middle class, which some people argue is a myth or otherwise. But for the sake of reference in our conversation, the middle class and some of the people who may not know their rights, we talk about minimum wage being increased. Is there a legal requirement for HR to increase salary every year? Just to be clear, because some people may not know whether it exists or not.
Yes. It is not anchored in law. It is anchored in HR policies. Every organization, at least one that has 20 and above employees, must have a HR policy manual. And in there, it is important to be clarifying to employees, because they also need to be able to plan their life. If the policy says there should be increments, then there should be. If it needs to change, there should be a discussion between the employer and employees, so that everybody understands where they are coming and where they are going. So it's a matter of policy implementation. It's the promise that they get when they are going into employment. Nonetheless, there is what we call the psychological contract, such that even if it is not there in policy that there will be annual increments, it is expected that the employer will consider the daily increases in cost of living and things like that, or when an economy grows, because when the GDP grows, then it should reflect on pay increases. But when the country is stagnant, or when, like Kenya, we have come from issues of extended electioneering period, a drought, and now flooding, it is imperative that we understand that merely increasing salaries, it will just increase inflation. It is inflationary in nature. So it is like printing money, and it just pushes the country forward. So now, as much as we push for pay increases, we must also understand that the country needs to be moving forward, so that the employers are able to increase salaries. Yes.
Okay. Tony, do you have any comment on this?
Yeah. I wish to agree with Miriam, because what she said is very important. We have had salary increases for the past 5 years. Minimum average wage for everyone is increasing. But when you adjust inflation, real wages are dropping. And that's what government needs to address, the cost of living. in terms of...
Let me stop you. What do you mean by real wages? Just for the sake of those who may not be very conversant with the economics of wages.
So the real wages is when you... Inflation basically is how much money can you use it out there. So what can you buy in 2013 with what you can buy today? So the real money that you have is what you can buy, not what you receive with your salary. It might be indicated 17,000. But when you go out there, 17,000 that you will use in 2013 and today is completely different. So when we are talking about increasing wages, so because of inflation and government is using so much money in all those projects and all that, we're increasing so much wages. So there's too much money out there that chasing too many few goods. So prices of goods become higher. So your money that you need to buy things is not what you expect. So one of the things that government can use to address that is address directly the cost of living, as the Executive Director of Federation of Kenyan Employers said. That's mostly electricity, but most of the Kenyans don't use electricity that much. So 70% still use the other sources. So famine, drought, that we need to address drought, that is raising the cost of food services. We need to address the prices of petroleum, diesel and all that. Those are the three things that bring the cost of living quite high. So that should be government's policy that I would like even Kotu to look at. Instead of talking about minimum wage, you're going around the solution, the problem with a different solution, not addressing it directly.
Okay, and this still brings the issue of what if, for instance, just going back to what we were talking about, what if I work in a certain company and at the beginning of the year, for a certain year I'm not given any increment. That means it is the HR which is going against the ethics and principles of HR?
Not really. As I said, it's a matter of expectation. Sometimes the organization is able to pay, and it's a matter of communication. What have you communicated to your employees? That there'll be annual increments, that there'll be no annual increments. It is important for the employer to make the employees understand that what matters is the performance of the organization. It is the bottom line, because you cannot pay what you don't have. The employer cannot pay what they don't have. It matters, it depends on how they are doing their business, but also how the government is enabling them. Tony has said electricity costs are high, and they are not just high, they are also unpredictable. We have seen the recent debate and the push for them to come down. We also now, the cost of fuel, it is increasing the things that should make the employers make more and therefore be able to pay workers more. So if the employer is able to increase annually, the employees should understand. If they are not able, it is not automatic that there should be annual increments. Because again, now we will be driving the employers out of business, you know, when we should probably, what matters is the salary you are paying, obviously should be above the minimum wage. No HR practitioner will advise you to pay below minimum wage. But are you able to move closer towards the living wage? If you can, you should. If you can't, at least make sure you are paying the minimum wage and you'll be cool with the government. Okay,
and I want to still stay on you for a bit, and this is now an issue that at times is not entirely addressed as it should, which is in the workplace, which is sexual harassment, which is one of the biggest issues, which at times is a silent beast, if we may call it that. You've had it, we've had it over the years in places like you have flower farms, for instance, and aside from there, we even have it even in the white collar spaces where we have corporates where people, you know, are being forced to have to give of themselves sexually for be able to get some advancements in their jobs or some security. Why do we have these kind of things when HR, you know, is there? Because we have cases where you have people reporting, but not much is done. Is it that HR is under capture by the relevant people?
Sexual harassment is unfortunate, and it is so difficult on the victim. Sometimes the perpetrator may never realize the damage they have done. But the worker, every person, men and women, they are protected. It is the Employment Act is very clear on sexual harassment. And all those steps every HR department should take to implement, they are very clearly laid out there. But it is unfortunate when the HR does not have the support of the management, the senior management of the organization. So the HR should seek support of the senior management to be able to handle some of these things, because sexual harassment is sensitive. Remember, some people are really victims. Others will want to take advantage of that protection and probably even come up. It is very delicate. You need to be able to investigate properly and be sure that this complaint is really genuine, and there is a way you are guided to even don't expose them. Some people don't want to be known that they were ever sexually harassed. And it is a delicate issue that requires a lot of sensitivity. And HR must be very soft on these things, but very hard on the perpetrators. So there needs to be very clear communication. Unfortunately, even some HR practitioners are predators. Some senior management are predators, and you as HR, you have to take a stand. Some of us have been forced to resign because their perpetrators are the employers. So when things are difficult, I go back to the government and talk about Inspectorate. There is the Department of Inspectorate under the Ministry of Labor. That we don't feel it. I must say that we don't feel that department. And the first employee you interviewed on set said that we don't see the labor office coming to our workplace to check how work is done, because HR can only do so much. If you choose your job over the dignity of the workers you're overseeing, you will just like want to survive as a human resource, because you're not just a HR practitioner, you're also an employee. Some will do as much as they can, but you can only do as much as probably your CEO or your employer can allow you to do. If, for example, you want to prosecute, is your employer ready for court cases? If you want to sack and they tell you, this is the best manager I have, you know, keep the ladies away from him, or keep the young men away from this lady. So we need support from senior management, and all HR are trained to seek that support. So let's use that, and that's the only way we will survive. Otherwise, deal with it very carefully, and you will be, it's not, we also face it anyway. We are also approached and we are harassed, and you have to, first of all, be above board yourself. You must be beyond reproach so that people can also be able to approach you. So I must ask HR to lead by example and not be afraid. If you have to lose your job sometimes because of some things, I think it's important that HR take a stand. Yeah.